You have a monthly budget, but are you planning for irregular expenses that happen every 6 months or just once a year? I'm going to reveal a 4-step process to budget for irregular expenses. My name is Michael. Welcome to the Michael Saves YouTube channel where I answer your money questions. And today's video is the result of a question that I had from a reader, and I'm going to show you that question right now. The reader asks, I am going to separate fixed expenses, mortgage, utilities, etc., and then track variable expenses. But where do you recommend that I put expenses that occur either every 6 months or yearly? Life insurance, car registration, or infrequently, unpredictably, car repairs, pet medical expenses, home pool repairs, etc. They are not monthly, so not sure how to plan and track those. Great question, and whether it's insurance, taxes, gifts, or some of the other things mentioned, there are a lot of expenses that don't happen monthly. But without a budget, those expenses may catch you by surprise when the bills come due. So in this video, the simple 4-step process to incorporate non-monthly expenses into your monthly budget. Let's get to it. Step 1 is to calculate your irregular expenses. Now, if you already are following a monthly budget, like the Google Sheets budget that I have, I'll link to that in the description below, you probably already have a pretty good handle on your variable expenses, things like how much you spend on food or how much you spend on gas. Well, now I want you to make a list of your irregular expenses, and you can go back, look at past statements to get a handle on those bills that come up either every 3 months, every 6 months, or maybe just once a year. And what you want to do is you want to get an annual total for all of those expenses. So if there's something that is every 6 months, you want to find out how much it's going to cost you every year before you move on to the next step. Step 2 is to divide your annual irregular expenses by 12. So in the first step, you calculated each irregular expense separately and how much it would cost you over the course of the year. Now I want you to add up all of them and divide it by 12. Here's an example of how that would look. In this example, you see there are 3 categories of irregular expenses: insurance, gifts, and taxes. The total for the year, $1,200. Again, in this example, the total for irregular expenses is $1,200 a year. Divide that by 12, you get $100 a month. And I'll explain why that number is important coming up right now in step 3. And step 3 is to add that amount to your monthly budget. So after you've added up all of your irregular expenses divided by 12, you have a monthly number since there are 12 months in a year. And you want to put that number into your monthly budget so whenever those bills come due for those semi-annual and annual expenses, you'll have the money to pay them. If you're using the Google Sheets budget template, add this number to the fixed expenses worksheet that I explain in my step-by-step tutorial of how to budget with Google Sheets. I'll link to that in the description below. I create this separate fixed expenses worksheet so that I can separate those expenses that I can't really control on a day-to-day basis from the variable ones, the ones that I can control on a day-to-day basis. Now, when you're adding the monthly amount for irregular expenses, you have a couple of choices. Create just a single line and call it something like irregular expenses, or create separate lines and list them out individually. Now, the fixed expenses worksheet is optional. This is part of my personal method, and again, I'll link to that in the description below. But if you use a different type of budgeting software, or you just don't want to fool around with the fixed expenses worksheet, that's okay. You can always add your irregular expenses just as another line item or line items with the rest of your expenses. The 4th and final step is to consider opening an irregular expenses savings account. And this is all about organization. I highly recommend this step. Let's go back to our example for me to explain. In this case, you would automatically transfer $100 a month from your checking account to a high-interest savings account just for your irregular expenses. Then, when one of your semi-annual or annual bills comes due, let's say your insurance, you would then transfer money from your savings account back to your checking account and pay that bill. Of course, you don't have to set up a separate savings account for irregular expenses, but doing so could earn you some more interest because high-interest savings accounts, especially with online banks, usually pay more interest than a regular checking account. Speaking from experience, I have multiple savings accounts for not only irregular expenses, but also savings goals. I find that they help me stay accountable. But I will say this, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, stick with one checking account and one savings account for now. But as your emergency fund grows, you may want to consider opening up a separate savings account for irregular expenses or other type of savings goals. A final thought here, creating a monthly budget and logging every transaction, that is the key to controlling your spending. But you're not getting a full picture if you don't include irregular expenses as part of your monthly budget. And these 4 steps that I've just outlined give a simple way for you to incorporate those non-monthly expenses into your monthly budget. I believe that the more data you add to your monthly budget, the better off you're going to be. Because as you enter expenses over time, you're going to start asking yourself, is there any way for me to lower this bill? And because you've put in the effort to build a better budget, you're more likely going to find more ways to save because you're just paying attention to your finances more than the average person. So if you want to create a budget for the first time, or maybe you're just ready to level up, keep watching for my step-by-step guide on how to use the Google Sheets budget template. It's free, and I'll also have a link to my blog in the description below. Until next time.